Welcome to BronsCast number 10. Wow, we've done 10. This is a momentous occasion. So today we've just had the first snow here in England, and I've just got my nice cup of tea here, and I've got this mince pie as well. Homemade by my wife. First ever mince pie she's made, and you can see it's a little bit deformed. So it tastes amazing. Pretty good for a first attempt. So, today's podcast we're going to be talking about, the title is, I'll just finish my mince pie. The title is Perfection Handmade by Robots? Which is a little bit of a weird title, I know. But basically, I was sort of thinking about this just because I'm about to put out like an official bootleg video, and it was just a gig basically. My friend David Beebe, who does the guitar hour with me, said, "Oh, I'll come down to your gig and I'll just shoot it," and he filmed it with a really nice DSLR camera on close-up, and he had like another camera on the drummer and then a wide-angle camera of the gig, and I was like, yeah, just come down, it's great. So we just recorded it with a stereo mic, so it just captured the sound in the room. Anyway, got to editing it, and I just thought, well, that's pretty good, but man, I wish I played better. And we're sort of chatting about it, releasing it and possibly kind of selling it, and what I should sell it for. Should I sell it, and he sort of really challenged me and said, look, this is a real gig, and it's a great gig, and the footage is great, and yeah, sure, there's a few mistakes in it, but at the end of the day, it just captured the feel of a real gig, And he said something that sort of stuck with me about this thing of chasing perfection and the pressure that we feel that we're under as artists to chase perfection. And I just started thinking about wondering where that comes from. And so we have this current situation, yeah? So if you look at TV, we have these perfect looking women on these perfect advertisements that say, if you just get this, you'll have this perfect life, and somehow perfection and happiness become like this thing. Like we start to think that the same thing. We have all this amazing technology now, like Photoshop, where we can go back and fix things and make people look a certain way that they don't look like, fix the imperfections. And it's not just Photoshop, it's social media and Facebook. You can present this perfect life of these perfect holidays with your perfect family pics. We kind of curate all the content that we put out there to give this perfect life. Obviously I'm not going to advocate you go and spill out all your family arguments on Facebook or whatever. That wouldn't be wise, but I think you know what I mean. And then there's like this pressure to always have new stuff, and somehow when old stuff it becomes old and worn out and not valued and worthless, and we want to throw it out and get the next newest thing, there's this constant pressure. And it's not just in like stuff like the latest iPhone or the right shampoo or whatever. It's guitar gear as well. It's all this thing where we push to get the latest, greatest thing, always chasing perfection. And in fact, it's got to a point now where manufacturers do this thing with built-in redundancy, where they make stuff they know is not going to last and it gets broken, so we throw it out and we have to buy a new thing. And a bit like, kind of always makes me think of my dad, when we think about cars. He says, when I was a lad, I could take the engine out, strip it down, put it back together, and off away I went, and everybody fixed everything. My dad doesn't actually talk like that. I'm just kind of putting that silly voice on. And there's some truth now that, everything's disposable, and engines and technology is now so complicated we don't fix things so much. We just get new things. And I think another thing that really got me thinking about all this stuff in the culture is just watching stuff like The X Factor. I remember once, I think it was the first series of The X Factor, and a girl went in and she did the audition. It's this talent singing competition, and you go in, you audition, you sing a song in front of a panel of judges, and one of the judges was this famous kind of nasty judge called Simon Cowell, and Simon Cowell has kind of got this reputation for not really caring about what anyone thinks and just telling people straight, which, you know, isn't always a bad thing, telling people straight, but he used these words, I'll never forget it. This girl went in, she didn't sing great, it wasn't terrible, and he just said, no, you're useless, just absolutely useless. And I just watched it and I just couldn't believe it. I was just thinking, okay, so she can't sing and it wasn't perfect, but you're saying, Simon Cowell, you're saying that she's useless now, so every time she goes to sleep or toilet, you know, those words are going to resonate in her head. And I just thought useless was the wrong word to use. And subsequently I decided I wasn't going to watch the X Factor anymore, just because I just thought that kind of promotes a version of society that I'm not really happy with, where our identity is so closely tied to some kind of idea of a perfection or a perfect performance. So that's on one hand, we have this thing where technology and social media and all that stuff we see this perfection, this image of perfection, and we feel compelled to chase this idea of perfection. And then on the other hand, we shun fakery, don't we? We kind of know that all that stuff is a bit fake, but, you know, we'll listen to a live performance and say, oh, well, that's rubbish. So the studio album was amazing, but man, you can't play it live. Or, you know, that's just all photoshopped, or even stuff people saying, oh, like multi-track recording is cheating, you know. I mean, you think back to Motown records, they just did it with one mic in the room, which is how I recorded the live DVD, by the way, just one mic in the room. But that kind of seems a bit weird. So we're just going to disregard all the technology now, and I'm just going to go back to trying to shoot an entire album not using digital recording effects or whatever, and not doing any EQ. That's kind of crazy. And we're not going to use Photoshop when we have this thing, but yet we get into these arguments of like slagging people off who are a bit out of tune, and when they sing live. I mean, even amazing singers like Adele have come under for real flack for being a bit flat, and, you know, all sorts of things can make you sing flat when you're live, and not having the right monitoring, the balance not being right. It's all sorts of things, really. But of course, now we're under this massive scrutiny, aren't we? And on YouTube, you can do a million takes of a video and then stitch together your perfect guitar take and put it up there. Look, wow, look at me, look, I'm an absolute master virtuoso shredder, you know. YouTube also means now that obviously it's kind of replacing live music, which, you know, I'm fine with that, and I get if you're really successful on YouTube, it means you don't have to go and gig. There's nothing wrong with that, but it also creates this perception where people might look to that and aspire to this idea of perfection, but in fact it's not always perfection, is it? There are mistakes made, and you can on YouTube present this perfect version. So we have the pressure of perfection. We ourselves sense that it's fake and kind of shun and criticise it when people take a risk to put themselves out there and do it live. And the end result is that we're all affected by it. You know, I'm affected by the pressure of trying to show a perfect performance. Like, you can get into this idea that where if your identity is so linked to the things that you do that, you know, we're chasing likes on a Facebook page, or if we post something up, are we checking in, you know, to see how many people have shared it or whatever, and we it's really easy. Even for me, I count myself as someone who's pretty secure. I'm happily married with 2 amazing kids. I'm doing a job I love, you know, creating music. I feel as I'm getting a bit older, I'm pretty comfortable in who I am. I don't have like kind of, and even despite all that, there's still this kind of pressure to conform. And this leads to some weird situations when it comes to art. So I'm just going to tell you a little story I came across earlier this year. There was a competition run online, like a guitar competition. And I didn't enter the competition, but and the prizes where you could win, I don't know, an amp and stuff, and the glory of winning this prestigious guitar competition or whatever. And one of the top guys, turns out, got called out by somebody saying that he'd cheated, and basically the performance that he'd done on there was heavily edited. He'd then sort of pretend to play it over the top, and some people were saying he hadn't even played it. It might have been using some software called Guitar Pro, where you basically input the notes and it sounds kind of guitarish, and then he mimed that. And so this kind of witch hunt started, where this kid was stripped of his prize. You know, and you could argue, and I wouldn't disagree, that in one sense he was cheating, and there's some prizes got there, and it wasn't, you know, it wasn't fully kind of, maybe he wasn't upfront about it. But what concerned me and upset me, if I'm honest, was just how some people just then laid into this guy. And I started thinking, hang on. We're not all immune to this pressure of trying to present a version of ourselves, this perfect version. Like, who here can throw the first stone, you know, to use that kind of parallel? Who's never been tempted to fake a video, do a fake photo, do a fake whatever to present this image of perfection? I started wondering and trying to think, what made him go to such lengths to win a competition, and, you know, fairly blatantly to the trained eye, although the judges didn't seem to spot it because he still won the prize, felt pressured to do that. And I started to worry a little bit about this guy's psychological well-being and mental health, you know, thinking, what, you know, all these people laying into him, is this what we've become? This thing where in one hand we're all pressured by perfectionism, on the other hand we're all throwing stones at people who just can't seem to deal with that. And that really bothered me. And so here I am, putting this live DVD out, and there are a few notes in there that bother me, and I was kind of started thinking, oh, you know, maybe I shouldn't put it out, maybe I should wait. And that is the classic problem that this perfectionism causes. Okay, first thing, fear. Okay, so the fear for all of us as we put this stuff out, when, you know, if we do a gig, if we play with musicians who we perceive are better than ourselves, if we play live, the fear is that, hey, I might get found out. People might realise that I'm not as good as either I've been presenting, or maybe, or even more confusingly, maybe I'll get found out that, like, people are going to find out I'm not as good as they think I am, if you know what I mean. Like, so it's like, because sometimes people have a perception that you're, like, amazing and stuff, and perhaps they don't fully understand of, like, the editing process or whatever. So there's that fear of getting found out. And I've really experienced that. I mean, I'm sure I've talked about this before on the podcast, where I got an opportunity to play with one of my heroes, Dave Bainbridge, and Frank Van Essen, who are both members of Iona, and I just worshipped this band Iona. Well, worship's probably a bit of a strong word, but just loved the band, got all their CDs, went to all the gigs, and I had an opportunity to go and play Iona songs on this tour with a Celestial Fire was the name of the band. It's basically, and I, for the first tour, which was in 2015, I was so scared. I was scared, A, that I wouldn't be good enough to play the music, and then B, I was scared that they'd look across and just think, man, who invited this guy? Like, he doesn't know what he's doing. And that comes from it's a pressure, isn't it, that you want not even to impress people, but you want them to think, I wanted them to think I was doing a good job, and had insecurities around being a good enough musician or whatever. And so that's a fear, and some of that desire to be liked is not a bad thing. Like Beethoven used to talk that the desire to be liked and the applause that he got definitely drove him to write music. Like, that was a driving force for him. And, you know, I think if an artist says, oh, I just do it for me and not to connect with an audience or with somebody, I'd say that's pretty unusual. Most people somewhere have a desire to see their stuff they create valued, okay? That's the way we're wired as human beings. So that's a natural thing, and that fear links into that. When it comes to fear, though, one thing I've discovered is I think that fear sometimes seems to be linked to, we seem to be predisposed to fear things that have statistically a really small chance of happening. So, like fear of spiders and sharks, for example. Like most of us, or most people, are really scared of spiders, especially in England. The spiders we get in this country are really tiny, but there's like a fear there. It just doesn't make any sense. In fact, if you look into the statistics of people who've been bitten by spiders and have died, how many people do you think it is? 2,000, 200, 150, 4, 2. In fact, it's a 0. In the last sort of decade, there are no recorded deaths by spider bites. And yet so many people are scared of spiders. It's kind of not logical, but our fears, we fear things that don't make sense. In fact, shark attacks, only 5 people I think were killed. Out of all the billions of people who live on this planet and go in the water, I think 5 people were shark attacked last year. So the statistics are just infinitesimally small. But fear, I think, is one of the things that leads us to maybe chase this perfection thing. We want to present this perfect ideal. I think the second thing, that fear then leads to procrastination. I'll just wait until I'm ready. Listen, guys, I know all about waiting until you're ready, okay? I was fairly good when I graduated from Guitar Institute in my 20s, early 20s, and due to largely fear and telling myself, if I can just play this, if I can just write this, if I've just got this equipment, if I've just got these people in my band, if I've just got these gigs, then I'll be ready to put some music out and go out and play. And I put it off all the way through my 20s. In fact, almost 20 years it took me to put an album out. And some of that was just really, I was telling myself, I just want it to be the best possible, I want it to be perfect. And procrastination is the creativity killer. If you take one thing away from this podcast, don't wait until you're ready and you've got it all lined up. Trust me, it's just, you'll never do it. You'll never be good enough in your own mind, because no matter how good you get, no matter how good I get on guitar or using effects or mixing or whatever, no matter how good A, there's always somebody better, and B, there's always more to learn. So you'll never get there. So the important thing is to just jump in, but more to about that later. I think a more legitimate thing would be like a responsibility to your fans, and I think this is a fair point. I was worried with this live DVD that the fans would see the mistakes and they'd think that I was being sort of disrespectful in a way, like I haven't put enough effort in, even though I rehearsed really hard for the concert and we mixed the sound ourselves, we did the lighting ourselves, there's no sound engineer. It was kind of a crazy gig. We set everything up ourselves. It's all really self-done, so we're under a lot of pressure to deliver this gig, and in the end it was a brilliant gig. And if you go to my website, to the news section, you can see a clip from the gig. But this responsibility to the fans is, maybe if you're an artist, is something worth giving some consideration. But one thing I've learned, and this is where I'm really different now than I was in my 20s, is it's important not to assume what an audience thinks. You can try and think, make assumptions on what they think and what they value is important. So the way I get around this is really level-headed stuff. I went to my mailing list. I sent the guys on my mailing list a clip of the video, because the guys on the mailing list get all my stuff first and all the little sneak previews, and said, would you want a polished performance? Do you want us to wait till we can shoot this better in a bigger venue? Would you listen to the clip? What do you think? What's important to you? And the response just blew my mind. I think it's the most response I've ever had from a mail out. I had I wish I counted so I could tell you, but it felt like somewhere between sort of 50 and 100 people emailed back to say, with really long emails, saying they loved the live performance, they loved how the sound was really sounded like you just at the gig, they loved how it was a real performance, they loved the interaction between the band, they loved the fact that there was mistakes, the mistakes didn't bother them at all. If anything, it made them enjoy the performance more, because it was just all the things I was worried about, they pretty much said the opposite. Listen, don't worry about this video's great. Whatever you do, put it out. And more to my surprise, they were like, we don't want a digital download, we want a DVD. So they want a physical item. So I'm thinking 2016, people seriously want this from me. It turns out they did. Not only do they want this thing, they want a physical product. And I assumed they didn't want that. So it just goes to show, what do I know, right? But in terms of this responsibility and feeling the responsibility to do a good job, that's really important. But it's better. Don't assume. Don't assume anything, because if you assume things, then you can get into trouble, and then you start to doubt them, and the doubt creeps in. You don't do anything. So just find a mechanism. If you're struggling with this perfectionism thing, and you find it really crippling, just find people that you can get some feedback from. And obviously the amazing thing for me with the mailing list is they're not obliged to say any of that stuff. Ultimately, if someone says to me on the mailing list, hey, we love it, we want to buy it, like, that's pretty good indication that I'm on the right track. And I think while I've been doing this, and the reason I want to share this with you is because I think some of the problem that arises with perfectionism and trying to create art and put music out is that we get confused with the categories. So let me give you a few questions to illustrate that. So first question, did the music of the Beatles win? For example, did the music of the Beatles win? Is that beautiful scene without error? Yeah? Is that beautiful scene without error? Do you love your friends and family because they are perfect? When you hear those questions, you realise that it's ridiculous because we don't categorise life in that way. And life and art is about expressing ourselves, about creating a connection. I'd argue that the perfectionism thing is a bit of a red herring. Obviously, we're chasing the best performance possible. We are. As artists, we want to present the best thing possible, to, I guess, fans, friends, whatever your thing is, presenting on the internet or whatever it is. But at the same time, did the music of the Beatles win? It's just an absurd question. Is it the best? Was that live? If someone came up to me and said, is that live gig the best gig you've ever done and will ever done? Was it perfect? Was there nothing you would change? Obviously, I've never done a gig like that and never will do. I've never had the perfect gig. I've had some good ones and I've had some really awful ones. And I had some amazing ones where the buzzes lasted for days and weeks, and then you go out there. And once that's worn off, you look back and watch it and just think, oh yeah, well, there's definitely areas to perfuse, because that's what we're striving to do, to refine. But refining your art is not the same as achieving perfection. They're like two different things. It's like all your kids. If you say to your kids the best looking kids in the world, for example, well, to me they are, but I'm not an idiot. I know that they're not the best looking kids in the world to everybody who looks at them, but there's a personal connection there. And I think this is the way to understand this quest for perfection. And I guess this idea of, is perfection handmade by robots, is kind of, as the title of the podcast is, like looking at that kind of, it's crazy, isn't it? We have goods now that say they're handmade, but they've been made mass produced in a factory somewhere, like when you get homemade cooking in a massive restaurant chain. It's just ridiculous, like this situation. And I think I'm tired of this quest for perfection. I'm tired. Audiences for sure are tired. And I think we're increasingly in a world where we just want real connections. In a way, the world is more close together. Like, it seems amazing to me that I can sell my music to people from all over the world. Australia, New Zealand, America, France, Germany, you name it. People buy my records. So the world seems really close. And yet, increasingly, it feels like we stay on Facebook and don't meet real people. And I think, and even personally, I feel like I miss that connection. And I think the whole perfectionism ties into that kind of thing where we can curate and control everything. I love handmade stuff, guys. You've seen my handmade cup, right? So I've got this handmade cup. And part of the reason I love this cup is because my dad was told by the local council needed to cut some trees down, some silver birch trees, so I went and chopped it down, the tree. I got a cup, placed the cup on top and drew out the outline of the cup, and then used my axe to shape it, and then a knife, and then put a hot coal on the top that burnt through the wood, and then carved out the centre for the cup. And this cup is amazing. It's really not uniform. It's quite an odd shape, and you can feel the grain of the wood, and you can see all the knife strokes because I didn't sand it off. You can also see the side that I drink out of. It's darker from all the coffee stains, and you can also see where the handle is. It's all being worn smooth by my fingers and holding it. And I love this cup, and I think I love it because it's not perfect, because it's unique, and I have a real connection to this cup, and that's why you'll see it on all sorts of stuff. Like here, whenever I take a shot, it's like a picture of this cup in there somewhere. I mean, look at the mince pie that Heather, his first ever mince pie. I think I'll have another bite out of it. It's not perfect. It's not like the ones you get from the shop. It tastes amazing. It's because the perfection of how it looks doesn't matter to how good it tastes. Yeah? This cup is amazing. It functions really well as a cup. I also have a handwritten note here. And for you guys who are on the podcast, you're not going to see this, but it's a note that's written in huge child writing. It's from my son, who's still really young, and he wrote this when he'd only just started to learn how to write. It says, I love my dad. He's a good musician, a little funny, and a pro at lightsabers. A pro at lightsabers. I love that. I love that he says he's a good musician, a little bit funny. Fair enough. Oh, it says very, very silly and a pro at lightsabers. So he values the fact that I'm very silly and a pro at lightsabers fighting above me being a good musician, and thinks I'm not very funny, which is fair enough. In terms of perfect notes and good grammar and things like that, you wouldn't say that's perfect. But in terms of what it communicates as a piece of art, I've kept that for a few years now. I use it as a bookmark, and I often look at it whenever I'm reading a book. It's there, and it has a connection with me because it says something like, it explains what he values as important. And I got this in the feedback for the DVD. Kind of blew me away a little bit. In terms of what people value as important, is that connection. I love handmade stuff, and I think there's also like a vulnerability to it and a humanity to stuff that's handmade. Like on my guitar here, my custom made guitar, I asked Jade and Rose to use wood that had imperfections in the fretboard. I don't think you're going to see that, but there's massive cracks and holes in the fretboard that were knots in the wood. I love this idea that the guitar will become worn and sort of it's got all the bits that make it unique, because of the bits that were regarded as imperfect and often get thrown out, and that's something that I really love. And the reason I love it is it brings to mind a story about a Japanese prince, and the Japanese have an art called kintsukuroi, which is KINTSUKUROI, so you can Google that and find out about it, get some pictures. And basically the story goes that it was a long time ago in Japan, and the emperor was about to hand over his power to the prince. And they're going to have a coronation, and as part of that, some of the rich people in Japan got together and bought him this priceless and rare bowl. And for whatever reason, the bowl got dropped and smashed. And it smashed into hundreds of pieces. And the emperor was really upset about this, and after all the officials had gone home, he talked about it and tried to derive meaning from it, into the night with the prince, knowing that the coronation was going to be the next morning. And so the bowl, all the pieces of the bowl placed in this room with the crown that was going to be used to for the coronation for the prince the following day. And this, they were tired, so they went the separate ways. And then turned out that somebody saw that somebody come and stolen the bowl and also stolen the crown. And they went to check at the emperor's quarters, and it wasn't there. And they went to check to the prince's quarters, and no one could get in. And anyway, so they didn't know who had stolen it. And then in the next day, what had happened is the prince's hands were all scarred and burnt, and the king was kind of like, what happened? And he looked down, and the prince presented him with this bowl that had been glued back together, and the cracks, he'd used the gold from the crown to sort of repair the bowl. And so you get all the cracks are filled in with gold, and he'd sort of foregone this crown and had a much more humble crown now to make, because there's less gold, because he'd gone into the gold to repair this bowl for the emperor. And it's a story about humanity, sort of. So he made a sacrifice there, and it's a story about something more beautiful being born out of something that's old and cracked. And I love that in this story in the context of perfectionism, because the object became more beautiful for the fact that it was broken and then put back together. And the reason was because the relationship between the prince and what he had done, and then the bowl had a story to it. And that's the same with all this handmade stuff. And when I'm me or you or whatever is putting out art and putting out music, I think if this mailing list experience and their response tells me anything, it's that people really value the beauty in not having the perfection but having the real deal, and the connection that they get with that humanity and vulnerability of somebody who's going out there playing the best they can, but in the pressure of the moment, maybe a few notes going not quite the right way, or whatever, nerves or whatever the reasons are, just lack of concentration or a distraction or anything, a technical problem. Sometimes we make mistakes, but it's the real deal, and that creates a connection. You know, Beethoven talks about suffering creating a connection, and that we have to suffer for our art. And there's another story I think of, actually, where there's a boy who didn't want to hold his mum's hands on the way to school, because the mum's hands were all deformed and mangled and shriveled and really ugly, and they were really kind of horrible to look at and felt a bit funny, and got to the stage he was really embarrassed of holding his mum's hand when he went to school. And he lived with went home one day, and he said something really mean about not wanting to hold his mum's hand anymore, and how her hands were ugly and disgusting and twisted and they've scared him and freaked him out. And his dad said, "Do you know why your mum's hands are like that?" He said, "When you were a toddler, you climbed and you tripped and fell into the open fire, and your mum pulled you out and patted you down and put the flames out with her hands, and badly burnt and deformed the hands." and that's why she looks that way. So obviously the moral of the story is the boy then understood, like, that actually these deformed hands were really beautiful because there was a sacrifice there and a suffering, and there was a story to be told. And this story is the thing I'm getting at in perfectionism. It's not like the finished product, it's the journey. But I know what you're going to be thinking. Oh, great, two stories. A story about a Japanese guy and a story about a mum with the burnt hands. You know, this isn't Hollywood. Are you kidding me? Does that mean you can just put any old rubbish out and expect people to buy it? And in fact, no, I'm not saying that, because that would break the connection. If you just take advantage and just put any old rubbish out, that's not the same as... That kind of shows a lack of care. What I'm talking here isn't a lack of care of preparation. It's where you've done your best. You know you've done your best. You've been as authentic as possible, and there's some mistakes there. And I think that's a different thing. I think anything that severs that connection, and some people might watch this DVD or see your live performance or hear your album and think, it's not for me anymore. And that's fine. I think you've got to be true to yourself, and I think most people will connect with that. Old weathered things tell a story, don't they? There's a journey. And I think this thing we're trying to do is not a finished thing. You know, obviously I know that my next DVD will be better, but I'm not going to wait until that to put it out. And, you know, further down the line when I've got 3 albums worth, I might go again and we can play a bigger audience and we'll go again. But I'll still look back at this DVD I have to put out and think, man, that was then, and have fond memories of it, and think, wow, I've come a long way. Do you know what I mean? That's kind of the thing. Like, it's not finished, but right here, right now, in this place, in this time in 2016, this is how it was, and that was the real deal. That was what it was like at that concert, and that's fine. And you know, it's like saying, oh, do you know what? I'll enjoy my kids in X amount of time. When they're 10, or when they're this, or when they're teenagers, or when they're married, I'll enjoy. You know, that nobody thinks like that. Time moves so fast, man. Like, I've got 2 kids now. I've got a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I'm trying really hard to enjoy every moment, because in the early days when my mother-in-law said, oh, before you know it, they'll be at school, I remember thinking, man, that's just a crazy thing to say. The kid's just been born. And actually now, like, there's a real drive for me to enjoy each stage that they're at and appreciate it for what it is, you know. And I think we've got to do the same as artists, you know. Enjoy things for what they are when they're happening, you know. And in terms of the fear thing, I think there's another analogy. It's like the diving board. You know, you can be the kid who looks up at the diving board and thinks it's too high. I'm sure if I climb up to that first level, I'll jump off in the water, I'll die. And you get up there, you look down, it looks really scary, you get vertigo, you think I'll never survive. And then, after much thinking about it, you just go, ugh, and jump. And there's just that, finally get the courage, step off the edge. You can feel like that. And then you land, and you bob back up out of the water, and the kid's like, wow, actually, not only did I survive that, but it's actually okay. And I think I'm going to go to the next level. I'm going to go to the higher diving board. And that's how this thing works. You know, as you go through and you put yourself out there, your confidence grows, and you do get ever closer to this idea of getting things perfect. But you get that I understand I'm never going to get there, okay? So I'd say, you know, let's not chase perfectionism. Let's live in the now, put our stuff out now, do the best we can, but let's not assume what our audience thinks. Let's not wait until we're ready. Let's not be fake. Let's create real connections with real people. And, you know, let's be more like this Kintsukuroi ball, you know, like, you know, let the gold shine through the cracks and let our humanity and our vulnerability be seen. And, you know, that's what I'm going to strive to do. And putting this DVD has just really reminded me of kind of vulnerability that we all feel, you know, when we put a thing out. And I'm really grateful to all the people who've said they're going to support it. I'm really grateful for the people who take the time to email me and say they enjoy the CD. But I haven't got some secret sauce or some magic formula. I haven't got this all worked out. I'm not famous. I'm not super successful in many ways, but I am. I feel like I've learned the secret to success, and that is not chasing perfectionism but enjoying the journey. Really cheesy, I know, but it is totally true. So that's it. Is perfection handmade by robots? The answer is no. And thanks for tuning in. If you enjoy this podcast, you want to check out my music, you can sign up on my website, davebrons.com. Get 2 tracks for free. There's clips of the live DVD on the website as well in the news section. I'll be releasing a pre-order campaign for that coming up soon. Just keep your eye on Facebook and on the website. And thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Take care, guys.